My fiancée humiliated me in front of her entire company for being an electrician, but when she took the microphone to mock me, I returned the ring in the parking lot, and she never saw coming what she lost. I'm 30 years old, I'm an electrician, I have my own business, and about 6 months ago, I ended a 4-year engagement in a way that still has me processing everything that happened. The thing is, I've always been proud of what I do. You know, it's honest work. I make a good living. I work with my hands and solve real problems for people. But it turns out the woman I was planning to marry never saw things the same way. And when I realized that, it was like someone threw a bucket of cold water right in my face. I met Sarah about 4.5 years ago, maybe 5. I honestly don't remember the exact date, but I do remember it was at a bar where I'd gone with some friends after work. I showed up still in my uniform, had my name embroidered on the shirt and everything, and she came over to talk to me because, according to what she told me later, she found it interesting that someone would show up straight from work without worrying about impressing anyone. She asked what I did and when. I told her I was an electrician and that I was starting my own business. She seemed genuinely interested, asked me 1,000 questions about how the whole owning your own company thing worked. And I felt good talking to her because it seemed like she really cared about what I did. Sarah worked in marketing for a medium-sized company. Not huge, but respectable. And from the beginning, it was clear she was ambitious, that she had plans to grow in her career, and I thought that was fine, that it was good to have goals, right? The first 2 years were good, or at least I thought they were. Sarah would come to my shop. Sometimes when she finished work early, she'd help me with administrative stuff because I wasn't that good with paperwork. And she seemed proud when I told her I'd gotten a new client or that I'd solved a complicated electrical problem in someone's house. We got engaged after 3 years together. It was kind of traditional. I proposed to her at a nice restaurant, nothing. Super elaborate but thoughtful, and she said yes, crying and the whole thing. At that moment, I was sure I'd found the right person. Like I thought we were going to build a life together and that she supported me in my thing as much as I supported her in hers. But looking back, I think the signs started appearing about a year before what happened at the party. I just didn't see them or didn't want to see them. Sarah started making weird comments about my work, like as a joke, but that still left me with an uncomfortable feeling. For example, if we were with her friends and someone asked what I did, she'd say things like, "Oh, Ryan fixes things that break." You know, the typical domestic emergency hero, and she'd laugh like it was super funny. Or when I'd come home after a long day and she'd see that my hands were dirty or my clothes were stained, she'd make disgusted faces and say something like, "Oh babe, you need a shower urgently. You look like you came out of a disaster zone." At first I'd laugh too because I thought it was her way of being playful. But after a while I started to feel there was something more there, like she was genuinely embarrassed about what I did for a living. Things got worse when Sarah got a promotion at her job. It was about a year and a half ago. They promoted her to manager of something. I don't remember exactly the title, but it was a more important position with better salary and more responsibilities. She was super excited, obviously, and I was happy for her too, because she'd worked hard to get it. But after that, everything changed. Sarah became obsessed with her professional image, with networking, with going to corporate events, with meeting the right people. She started talking differently, dressing differently. She even changed the way she wrote her emails because she said she had to project a more sophisticated image. And I understood that to a certain extent. I mean, if your job requires you to present yourself a certain way, well, that's fine. But the thing is, she started acting like I didn't fit into this new world she was building. One day, about 6 months after her promotion, we were having dinner, and she told me that her company was going to have a year-end party at a fancy hotel downtown, that it was an important event where all the executives were going to be, and that she really wanted me to go with her. I told her sure, no problem. Although honestly events like that aren't my thing, I prefer something more relaxed. But it was important to her, so I was going to make the effort. Sarah told me I had to dress well, no jeans and t-shirt, that this was different from our normal outings. I bought a new suit. Not super expensive, but decent. Got my hair cut, cleaned myself up well. And when the day of the party came, I thought I looked presentable, like I wasn't going to embarrass anyone. We got to the hotel and the thing was really elegant. There was a huge ballroom with Christmas decorations everywhere, waiters, serving champagne, live music, and a bunch of people in expensive suits chatting in groups. Sarah knew almost everyone there and started taking me from group to group, introducing me. And that's when I started to realize something wasn't right. Every time she introduced me, she'd say something like, "This is Ryan, my fiancé. He's an electrician, basically the guy to call when you blow a fuse." Or, "Oh yeah, Ryan is super handy. If something breaks in your house, he can fix it. It's like having a personal handyman." And people would laugh, like it was a super funny joke, and I'd just stand there smiling uncomfortably because I didn't know what to say. I tried a couple times to talk about my business, about the projects I was handling, about how I'd just landed a big contract to do the electrical system for a new commercial building, but Sarah always changed the subject or made another comment that minimized what I was saying. Things reached their peak when Sarah's boss, a guy about 50 years old in a suit that probably cost more than my work truck, decided to make a toast. Everyone gathered in the center of the ballroom with their glasses, and the guy started talking about the year's achievements, outstanding employees, goals for next year, the typical corporate thing. And then Sarah asked for the microphone because she wanted to say something, and I thought she was going to thank the company or something like that, but no. She started telling a story about how a few weeks ago her dishwasher had broken down in our apartment, and luckily she had her electrician fiancé who came to the rescue. People started laughing, and she continued, said something like, "Yeah, it's very convenient to have someone who can fix all those little household things. I never have to call a plumber or technician because Ryan handles everything. It's like having a 24/7 free repair service." Everyone was laughing, her boss was laughing, her coworkers were laughing, and I just stood there, feeling the blood rush to my face because I realized she was using me as the joke of the night. When Sarah finished talking and people applauded, I walked out of the ballroom straight to the parking lot because I needed air. I needed to process what had just happened. I stood there for about 10 minutes trying to calm down, thinking about whether I was overreacting or if I was right to feel humiliated. And I came to the conclusion that, no, I definitely had a right to be angry. Sarah came out looking for me after a while, found me in the parking lot and asked me what was wrong. Why had I left? I told her we needed to talk about what had just happened in there. How could she think of talking about me like that in front of her whole company, that she'd made me feel like my work was worthless, like I was just the guy who fixes things and nothing more? She got super defensive, told me I was overreacting, that she was just being funny, that everyone knew it was a joke and I was being too sensitive. I told her it wasn't a joke, that I'd been hearing comments like that from her for months, that every time she talked about my work, she did it in a way that sounded condescending and dismissive, and that I was tired of feeling like she was embarrassed about what I do. Sarah looked at me like I was crazy and told me the problem was that I didn't understand how the corporate world worked, that she had to project a certain image at her job, and that, frankly, my career wasn't exactly glamorous. Those were her exact words. It wasn't glamorous. She told me she'd worked hard to get where she was, and that she needed a partner who could be at her level in those environments, not someone who felt attacked by a harmless comment. I asked her if she really thought my job wasn't good enough for her, if this whole time she'd been seeing me as something less than her, and she didn't answer me directly, but she didn't deny it either. She just stood there with her arms crossed, saying, I was making an unnecessary scene. At that moment, something clicked in my head, and I realized I couldn't marry someone who didn't respect me, who didn't value what I did, who saw me as a convenient accessory, or worse yet, as an embarrassment she had to disguise with jokes. I took out the engagement ring she'd given me. Well, technically I'd given it to her, but she was wearing it, and I gave it back to her right there in the parking lot. I told her I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life feeling less than anyone for having an honest job, that I was proud to be an electrician and to have my own business, and that if she couldn't be proud of me too, then there was no point in continuing together. Sarah was shocked. I think she didn't expect me to react like that. She started saying we were engaged, that we couldn't break up over something so silly. What was she going to tell people? I told her to tell them whatever she wanted. That I was leaving, and I got in my truck and drove off leaving her, there in the parking lot. What happened next was a disaster because Sarah went back to the party and apparently told everyone that I'd had an insecurity attack and that I'd broken up with her over nothing, basically painting me as the crazy one in the story. The next day, she started posting things on social media. Vague posts, like sometimes people show their true face when you least expect it, or when someone can't handle their partner's success. You know, that kind of thing. Her friends started commenting supportive things, and I just sat there reading all that thinking if she really believed her own version of events, or if she knew perfectly well what she'd done and was just trying to look good. But then, about a week after all this, I got a message from one of Sarah's coworkers, a woman I'd met a couple times at other gatherings. She wrote to tell me she'd heard what happened, and that she wanted me to know that Sarah had always talked about me dismissively at the office, that she constantly made comments about how she was with someone who only knew how to fix things, that her coworkers even had an inside joke about the handyman boyfriend. She told me she'd always felt those comments were out of place, but had never said anything because it wasn't her place. But that after seeing what happened at the party, she felt I deserved to know the truth. That confirmed for me that it hadn't been my imagination, that Sarah had really been embarrassed of me this whole time, and that I'd done the right thing, ending things. About 2 weeks later, Sarah's best friend, with whom I also had a good relationship, called me and asked me to meet her for coffee. I accepted because honestly I wanted to hear what she had to say. We met at a coffee shop near my shop, and she told me that Sarah had been talking to her friends for months about how she felt like she'd settled for someone who wasn't at her level. That when they asked her why she stayed with me if she felt that way, she'd say, I was stable, predictable, easy to control, that I didn't give her problems and that was convenient for her while she focused on her career. Her friend told me all this crying because she felt bad for having known and not having told me anything before, and I just sat there processing all that information, feeling a weird mix of relief and anger. Relief at having gotten out of that relationship and anger at having wasted 4 years with someone who never saw me as her equal. After that, I decided to take a long weekend and went alone to the mountains, rented a small cabin with no internet or cell signal, and spent 3 days basically disconnecting from everything and thinking about my life. I realized I'd let Sarah define my worth for too long, that I'd started doubting my work and my achievements because she constantly made me feel they weren't enough. But being there alone, looking at the mountains and taking hikes and cooking for myself, I remembered why I'd chosen to be an electrician in the first place, because I liked working with my hands, solving problems, seeing tangible results of my work at the end of the day. I remembered that I had my own business at 30 years old, that I had clients who trusted me and recommended me to others, that I made enough money to live comfortably, and that all of that was something I should be proud of, regardless of what anyone else thought. When I came back from the trip, I found out from a mutual friend that Sarah was having problems at work. Apparently, her behavior at the party hadn't been well received by some of the executives, especially the fact that she'd used the event's microphone to make jokes about her personal life instead of saying something professional or relevant to the company. They were considering her for another promotion, but in the end, they gave it to someone else, and from what I heard, Sarah was furious because she felt she'd been unfairly passed over. Part of me felt satisfaction hearing that. I'm not going to lie, but another part just felt nothing, because I'd already emotionally disconnected from everything related to her. The last few months have been about rebuilding, I guess. I expanded my business, hired an apprentice who's learning the trade and helps me with bigger jobs, and I even started teaching basic electrical classes 2 nights a week at a community center because I like the idea of teaching people practical things they can use in their daily lives. I also reconnected with friends I'd stopped seeing because Sarah always said they were too informal or didn't fit the image she wanted to project. And I realized how much I'd sacrificed trying to keep someone happy who was never going to be satisfied with me anyway. Sarah tried to contact me a couple times in the following months, messages like "we need to talk" or "I made mistakes, but we can fix this." But I never responded because I knew there was nothing to fix. That the relationship was over from the moment I realized. She saw me as less than her. The last time I heard anything about her was about a month ago when I found out she was dating someone new. A guy who works in finance or something like that. And honestly, I didn't care. I hope they're happy or whatever. But that's not my story anymore. What I took away from all this is that I learned not to let anyone make me feel inferior for the work I do, or the life I've chosen to live. Being an electrician isn't glamorous by some people's standards, but it's honest, it's necessary, and it's mine. I have a truck with my name on the side, tools I know like the back of my hand, and clients who call me at 2 in the morning because they know I can solve their problems. And that's worth more than any fancy corporate party or any relationship with someone who can't see the value in that.